What if Roboute Guilliman went to war against the Avengers? The Lord Regent of the Imperium stepped through a warp rift above Earth, his fleet of ultramarines behind him, believing this world to be a lost human colony corrupted by Xenos influence. As he gazed upon gods walking among mortals and mutants, wielding reality-bending powers, his tactical mind reached one conclusion: this world required the Emperor's justice. But when the Primarch's unstoppable crusade collided with Earth's mightiest heroes, would his superhuman tactical genius and millennia of warfare experience prove superior to gods, monsters, and the very concept of human freedom? The stars above Earth twisted and screamed. Space itself tore open like fabric ripping apart, and through that impossible wound came something that should not exist. Purple and black energy crackled at the edges of the tear, colors that hurt to look at, colors that didn't belong in normal reality. The darkness of space suddenly filled with light as massive ships emerged from the warp rift, vessels so large they blocked out entire sections of stars. Each ship was a fortress, covered in Gothic towers and golden eagles, guns bristling from every surface like the spines of some ancient metal beast. The largest ship sat in the center, a cathedral in the void, its hull inscribed with words in a language Earth had forgotten 10,000 years ago. On the bridge of the Macraga's honor, Roboute Guilliman stood before the observation viewport, his eyes taking in the blue and green planet below. He stood 13 feet tall, a giant among giants, wearing armor that gleamed with blue and gold. The armor of fate wrapped around his superhuman frame, each plate a masterwork that had taken centuries to craft. In his hand he held the Emperor's sword, a blade that burned with golden fire, a weapon that could kill anything, even gods. His face was perfect, too perfect, like a statue of an ancient hero brought to life. But his eyes held something else, a coldness born from 300 years of endless war. Behind him stood his honor guard, the Victrix Guard, warriors in ancient Terminator armor. Each one was over 8 feet tall, their armor thick enough to withstand cannon fire. They carried power swords that crackled with blue energy and storm shields decorated with the symbol of Ultramar. They said nothing, waiting for their Primarch's command, as they had waited for centuries. Guilliman's mind processed what his eyes saw in seconds. The planet below showed signs of advanced civilization. Satellites orbited in neat patterns. Cities glowed on the night side, organized and bright. But something was wrong. His tactical genius, honed through millennia of conquest and administration, detected the rot beneath the surface. His ship's sensors had already cataloged the impossible. Beings of immense power walking freely among normal humans. Genetic deviations that should have been purged. And worst of all, artificial intelligences controlling vast networks of information and weaponry. "Lord Regent," said Captain Sicarius, stepping forward. His armor was bright blue, decorated with golden laurels and purity seals. "Our augurs detect multiple anomalies. There are beings on the surface that register power levels equivalent to greater demons. Some appear to be Xenos, others appear to be humans merged with machines. And there is warp corruption. Faint but present, concentrated around several locations." Guilliman's jaw tightened. He had seen this before, on 1,000 worlds across the Imperium. A human colony, lost during Old Night, that had fallen to corruption without the Emperor's light to guide them. These people didn't even know they were damned. They walked beside aliens, created thinking machines, and allowed psychers to roam free without sanction or control. It was his duty, his purpose, to bring them back into the fold. To save them from themselves. "Broadcast on all frequencies," Guilliman commanded. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of absolute authority. Standard compliance protocols, high Gothic primary, with secondary translation matrices for local languages. The communication systems across the entire fleet activated. Every satellite, every radio tower, every communication device on Earth suddenly received the same message. The voice that came through spoke in a language that sounded ancient and powerful, then repeated in broken formal English. "I am Roboute Guilliman, Lord Regent of the Imperium of Man, avenging son of the Emperor, Lord of Ultramar. This world has been identified as a lost human colony in violation of Imperial law. You have consorted with Xenos, created abominable intelligence, and allowed dangerous psychers to exist without sanction. In the name of the Emperor of Mankind, I demand immediate compliance. Surrender all alien beings for deportation. Deactivate all artificial intelligences. Submit all psychers for evaluation and soul binding. Failure to comply within 1 solar hour will result in military intervention. The Emperor protects, but only the faithful. In the Avengers compound, alarms screamed to life. Tony Stark was in his workshop when every screen suddenly displayed the same message. Friday, his AI, immediately began analyzing the transmission. "Boss, we've got a problem," Friday said, her voice tense. "Multiple massive objects just appeared in orbit. I'm reading 17 vessels, each one between 2 and 5 kilometers in length. They're not matching any known design. Energy signatures are off the charts." Tony's face went pale. He'd seen a lot of things: aliens, gods, robots, wizards. But this felt different. The ships in orbit looked old, ancient, like something from humanity's darkest myths brought to life. "Get everyone here, now, and someone call Fury. Tell him we've got uninvited guests with really big guns." At the Sanctum Sanctorum, Dr. Strange collapsed against his desk, blood dripping from his nose. Wong rushed to his side, concern etched on his face. Strange's hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. "Stephen, what is it?" Wong asked. "Something came through," Strange gasped. "Not from another dimension, from somewhere worse. I can feel it, Wong. There's corruption around those ships, like reality itself is sick near them. It's similar to the dark dimension, but different, older, angrier." Strange's astral form had touched the edge of the warp rift when it opened, and what he felt there had nearly shattered his mind. It was a place where thoughts became real, where emotions had power, where daemons swam through seas of screaming souls, and these newcomers, they lived with that horror always at their doorstep. In New Asgard, Thor felt the disturbance ripple through the cosmos. He stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, Stormbreaker in hand, his eyes turned skyward. The power he sensed was vast, but it wasn't like the Infinity Stones or Dormammu. This was something else, something that felt almost human, but twisted into something far more dangerous. He pulled out his phone and dialed Steve Rogers. "Captain, we have a situation. There are ships in orbit, and whoever commands them believes they own Earth." Steve Rogers stood in the compound's briefing room minutes later, surrounded by the available Avengers. Tony had the main screen showing the fleet in orbit, each ship rendered in perfect detail by his satellites. Natasha Romanoff studied the images with a spy's careful eye. Bruce Banner nervously adjusted his glasses. Wanda Maximoff stared at the ships, her hands glowing faintly red. "They want us to hand over aliens?" Natasha said slowly. "That includes Thor, and probably half of the people we've saved over the years. And they want us to destroy all AIs." Tony added, his voice tight. "That's Vision. Friday. Every piece of helpful technology we've built. They're basically demanding we go back to the Stone Age." "They said psychers," Wanda said quietly. "I think that means me, people with powers like mine." Steve's face hardened into the expression he wore before every impossible fight. "We don't negotiate with terrorists, and we certainly don't hand over our friends." Tony was already working on a response transmission. "I'm going to try talking first. Maybe they're reasonable. Maybe they'll listen to logic." "Something tells me," Bruce said, staring at the Gothic architecture of the ships, "that these people stopped listening to reason a long time ago." Tony's transmission went out minutes later, professional and diplomatic. He introduced Earth as an independent world, explained they meant no harm, and requested a peaceful meeting to discuss misunderstandings. He emphasized Earth's sovereignty and their right to self-determination. On the Macraga's honor, Guilliman listened to the response with growing disgust. The voice belonged to the one his sensors identified as heavily augmented with technology, a man more machine than human by choice. The arrogance in the transmission was staggering. This Tony Stark spoke of rights and sovereignty as if a corrupted world had any right to refuse the Emperor's grace. Worse, the man's every word was filtered through an artificial intelligence, an abomination that should have been destroyed on sight. "Tech heresy," Guilliman said flatly. "The speaker is corrupted by his own creations. There will be no negotiation with those who embrace the abominable." He turned to his officers. "Prepare a drop pod assault. 20 Battle Brothers, Victrix Guard, and myself. Target the structure they call the Avengers compound. It appears to be their seat of government. We will decapitate their leadership and force immediate surrender. Rules of engagement. Avoid civilian casualties where possible. Our purpose is compliance, not extermination." The Space Marines moved with practiced efficiency. Within the massive hangar bay of the flagship, warriors in bright blue power armor loaded into drop pods. Each Marine was a superhuman killer, stronger than 10 men, faster than any normal human could track, armed with bolters that fired explosive rounds. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. One more would fall before sunset. Guilliman entered his own drop pod, a larger design meant for his massive frame. The Emperor's sword hummed at his side, eager for battle. His tactical mind was already mapping the assault. The compound's defenses would fall in minutes. The enhanced humans would resist, but they would learn the difference between their small skirmishes and true war. He would show them mercy if they surrendered quickly. If not, he would show them why Primarchs were built to conquer galaxies. The drop pods launched like meteors, 20 trails of fire screaming down through Earth's atmosphere. They fell toward New York, toward the Avengers compound, toward a confrontation that would shake the world. The drop pods hit the ground like the fist of an angry god. 20 streaks of fire slammed into the lawn surrounding the Avengers compound, each impact creating a crater 10 feet wide. The earth shook. Windows shattered for 100 yards in every direction. Car alarms screamed across the entire complex. Then, with a hiss of pressure seals releasing, the pods opened like metal flowers blooming in reverse, and from each one stepped a warrior in blue armor. The Ultramarines moved with purpose, their bolters raised and ready. Each Space Marine stood over 8 feet tall in their power armor, walking fortresses of ceramite and plasteel. Their helmets scanned the area with red-eye lenses, marking targets and threats. They formed a perfect perimeter in seconds, a textbook military deployment that would have made any Earth general weep with envy. In the center of their formation, the largest drop pod opened, and Roboute Guilliman emerged. Inside the compound, alarms howled. Tony Stark's fingers flew across a holographic display, pulling up external cameras. What he saw made his blood run cold. 20 armored giants surrounded by the wreckage of his lawn, and at their center, something even larger, something that moved with the confidence of a being who had never lost a battle. "Friday, get every defense online now," Tony shouted, already running toward his armor platform, "and someone get the others here immediately." Steve Rogers was already moving, shield in hand, running toward the main entrance. Natasha and Clint Barton flanked him, weapons ready but faces grim. They'd fought aliens before, but these warriors moved differently. Professional, disciplined, dangerous. The compound's automated defenses activated. Heavy machine guns emerged from hidden positions in the walls, tracking systems locking onto the intruders. Missiles launched from roof-mounted pods, streaking toward the Space Marines with trails of white smoke. The guns opened fire, hundreds of rounds per second hammering toward the armored giants. The bolter fire that answered was like thunder. Each bolt was a small rocket, explosive-tipped, designed to punch through tank armor. The compound's automated guns exploded in showers of sparks and twisted metal. The missiles never reached their targets, intercepted by precise bolter rounds that detonated them in midair. In 3 seconds, the compound's external defenses were nothing but smoking scrap. The Ultramarines advanced. Their movements were coordinated, each warrior covering his battle brother. Every angle watched. They reached the main entrance, a reinforced door designed to withstand anti-tank weapons. A Terminator-armored Victrix guard stepped forward, his power fist crackling with blue energy. One punch, and the door exploded inward, torn from its frame like paper. Steve Rogers stood in the hallway beyond, shield raised. Behind him stood Natasha, her widow's bitecrackers charged and ready, and Clint with an arrow already nocked. They looked tiny compared to the armored giants filling the doorway. "Last warning," Steve said, his voice steady despite the fear he felt. "Stand down and we can talk about this." The lead Space Marine tilted his head slightly, as if confused by the concept. Then he raised his bolter. The weapon roared, and explosive rounds tore down the hallway. Steve's shield came up instinctively, and the vibranium absorbed impacts that would have destroyed concrete. Each hit rang like a bell, the force behind it enough to make Steve's arm go numb. Natasha and Clint dove for cover as the walls around them exploded into dust and debris. Then the Space Marines charged. They moved faster than their size suggested was possible, their power armor servos whining with effort. Steve braced himself and met the first Marine head-on. His shield slammed into the warrior's chest plate, and for the first time in the battle, something unexpected happened. The Marine actually stumbled back a step. Inside his helmet, Brother Victorious stared at the primitive shield in shock. His armor's sensors showed the material was absorbing kinetic energy in ways that defied normal physics. The small human wielding it was enhanced somehow, stronger and faster than normal, but still just human. Yet that shield, that impossible shield, had stopped his charge. Steve didn't waste the moment. He spun low, shield edge aimed at the Marine's knee joint where the armor was thinner. The vibranium edge scraped across ceramite, leaving a scratch but not penetrating. The Marine's backhand caught Steve in the chest, sending him flying 15 feet down the hallway. Only his enhanced body kept his ribs from shattering. Natasha fired her widow's bites, electrical charges meant to stun normal humans. They crackled across the lead Marine's armor, doing nothing. She switched tactics, pulling out explosive charges and attaching them to the walls. "Clint, bring the house down." Clint's arrows flew, each one tipped with explosive heads. They detonated along the ceiling, bringing down tons of concrete and steel support beams. The Space Marines didn't even slow down. They walked through the collapsing hallway like it was a light rain, their armor shrugging off impacts that would have killed normal soldiers. Then a roar shook the entire building. The wall to the left exploded outward, and through the dust came something green and massive. The Hulk had arrived, and he was already angry. He crashed into the nearest Space Marine like a freight train hitting a car. The warrior flew backward, his armor crumpling where the Hulk's fists had connected. For the first time, the Ultramarine's advance stopped. The Hulk grabbed another Marine by the helmet and threw him through 3 walls. He caught a power fist strike on his shoulder and barely flinched, then returned the hit with interest, denting ceramite armor with his bare hands. The Space Marines adjusted their tactics immediately, 3 of them focusing on the green giant while the others continued forward. Bolter fire concentrated on the Hulk. Explosive rounds tore into his flesh, each one detonating with enough force to blow a normal person apart. The Hulk roared in pain and rage. The rounds hurt him, actually hurt him, something few weapons could claim. But pain just made him angrier, and angrier meant stronger. He grabbed a Space Marine by the leg and used him as a club to beat another Marine, armor clanging against armor and a sound like church bells colliding. Outside, Tony Stark shot into the sky in his Mark L armor, the nanotech suit flowing over his body like liquid metal. He'd watched the battle through his cameras, seen Steve nearly killed, and Natasha forced to retreat. These weren't normal enemies. These were professional killers in armor that made his look primitive. "Friday, analyze their armor composition," he said, flying toward the compound. "Find me a weakness." "Working on it, boss," Friday replied. "But those suits are incredibly advanced. Multiple redundant systems, layered defensive fields. They're reading power outputs similar to a small reactor in each suit." Tony's repulsors blazed as he dove toward the largest figure, the one standing back and watching his troops work. Guilliman. The Primarch saw him coming and simply waited, the Emperor's sword held loosely in one hand. Tony opened fire with everything. Repulsors, micro-missiles, lasers, every weapon system built into his suit. The barrage would have destroyed a tank. Guilliman's armor took the hits, energy fields flaring golden as they absorbed the impacts. The Primarch didn't even move. When Tony's attack ended, Guilliman raised his free hand almost lazily. Tony felt something grip his armor, not physically, but mentally. His suit froze in midair, every system locked. He couldn't move, couldn't even think clearly. The pressure in his mind was enormous, like a giant hand squeezing his brain. Through his helmet's display, he saw Guilliman walking toward him, each step measured and calm. "Your technology is impressive," Guilliman said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "For a corrupted world, you have achieved much, but you have allowed machines to think. You have given artificial minds control over your weapons, your lives, your very thoughts. This is heresy of the highest order." Tony tried to speak, tried to move, but the psychic pressure was too much. He felt his armor opening against his will, the nanotech peeling away like skin. In seconds, he stood on the ground, no longer Iron Man, just Tony Stark in his workshop clothes. Guilliman towered over him, 13 feet of armored demigod studying him like a scientist studies a bug. "You have potential," Guilliman said, and there was almost approval in his voice. "Your mind is strong. You resist when others would have collapsed, but your path leads only to damnation. Humanity cannot survive alongside thinking machines. History has proven this truth in blood, again and again." Tony's mouth finally worked. "You don't get to decide that. Not for us. Not for Earth." "I do not decide," Guilliman replied. "The Emperor decides. I merely enforce his will. Your world will comply, or it will be brought to compliance. These are the only options." Thunder cracked across the sky. Lightning, massive and brilliant, struck down from clear air. It hit Guilliman square in the chest, enough electricity to power a city for a week. The Primarch staggered, his armor's energy fields flaring and sparking. Tony scrambled backward as Thor landed between them, Stormbreaker crackling with power. "You will not harm my friends," Thor declared, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "I am Thor Odinson, King of Asgard, and I will not allow you to threaten this world." Guilliman straightened, rolling his shoulders as his armor's systems reset. He studied Thor with new interest, his enhanced senses taking in every detail. This was no human, no matter how enhanced. This was something else, something that called itself a god. In Guilliman's experience, beings who claimed godhood were either deluded or dangerous. Usually both. "You are Xenos," Guilliman said flatly, "an alien pretending to be a god, corrupting humans with false worship. Your kind is not tolerated in the Imperium." Thor's eyes flashed with lightning. "I pretend nothing. I am the son of Odin, protector of the 9 realms, and I have never demanded worship from the people of Midgard. I stand as their friend, not their master." "Noble sentiments," Guilliman acknowledged, "but ultimately meaningless. Humanity requires no alien protectors. Under proper guidance, they are capable of defending themselves." The Emperor's sword ignited in Guilliman's hand, golden flames wreathing the blade. Thor raised Stormbreaker, lightning dancing between his fingers. For a moment, they simply stood there, 2 warriors from different realities, each convinced they were right. Then they moved. Guilliman struck first, his superhuman speed closing the distance in a blink. The Emperor's sword swept in a perfect arc, aimed at Thor's neck. Stormbreaker came up to block, enchanted metal meeting holy fire. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, shattering every remaining window in the compound. They fought like gods of war. Guilliman's tactical genius adapted to Thor's fighting style within seconds, blocking attacks before Thor fully committed to them, finding openings in the Asgardians' guard. But Thor had fought for over 1,000 years, faced giants and elves and dark elves. He called down lightning that would have vaporized normal men, only to watch Guilliman's armor absorb it through some impossible technology. The Emperor's sword left burning lines across Thor's armor. The weapon was no ordinary blade. Thor felt it, a wrongness when it came near him, like it was designed to kill beings exactly like him. One solid hit from that blade, and even his godly healing might not save him. Stormbreaker crashed into Guilliman's shoulder, cracking the ceramite plating. The Primarch grunted in pain, the first sound of discomfort he'd made. His counterattack was immediate, a kick that sent Thor flying backward 50 feet. They circled each other, both bleeding, both breathing hard. Inside the compound, the battle continued. The Hulk had destroyed 3 Space Marines' armor, forcing them to fight without their suit's protection. But even without power armor, a Space Marine was dangerous. Their enhanced muscles and extra organs made them superhuman in ways the Hulk could respect. Steve had rallied with Natasha and Clint, using hit-and-run tactics to slow the advance. But they were losing ground. Then the air shimmered, and a circular portal of orange sparks opened. Through it stepped Dr. Strange, his hands already weaving complex patterns. The cloak of levitation billowed around him dramatically. "This ends now," Strange declared. Behind him, more portals opened, and through them came reinforcements. War Machine in full armor, Falcon with his wings spread, even Spider-Man swinging through on his webs. Guilliman saw the sorcerer, and his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. His psychic senses screamed warnings. This man reeked of warp corruption. The magic he wielded was similar to the powers that daemons used, reality-bending and wrong. In Guilliman's reality, such men were either soul-bound to the Emperor's service or executed. There was no third option. "Sorcerer," Guilliman said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "you wield the powers of the warp without sanction. You open doors that should remain closed. You are the most dangerous being on this planet." Strange's hands never stopped moving, defensive shields forming around the compound. "I protect this reality from threats you can't imagine. The powers I use are under control." "That is what they all say," Guilliman replied, seconds before the daemons pour through. The Emperor's sword blazed brighter, and Strange felt something he'd never experienced before. His magic began to fail. The spells he wove unraveled like thread being pulled from cloth. The sword's power was creating a null zone around Guilliman, a bubble where warp-based powers simply stopped working. Strange's eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. Nothing can just cancel magic. Your magic is merely the warp-given form, Guilliman said, advancing on the sorcerer. And the Emperor's sword was made to fight beings of the warp. You are outmatched, witch. Strange pulled every trick he knew. He tried mirror dimension traps, only to watch them shatter against Guilliman's null aura. He tried temporal manipulation, but time itself seemed reluctant to bend near the Primarch. In desperation, he opened a portal directly beneath Guilliman's feet, trying to drop him into the ocean. Guilliman simply jumped, his armor's servos launching him 30 feet into the air. He landed in front of Strange, the Emperor's sword raised for a killing blow. Strange threw up a shield of pure will, the last desperate defense of a sorcerer who'd run out of options. The sword cut through it like paper. The blade stopped an inch from Strange's neck. Guilliman held it there, steady as stone, looking down at the sorcerer with eyes that held no mercy but also no cruelty, just cold calculation. You could destroy us all, Strange said quietly. Couldn't you? Yes, Guilliman replied simply, but that is not my purpose. I came to save humanity, not destroy it. Surrender now, and I will show mercy. Continue to resist, and I will do what I must. Around them, the battle had stopped. The Avengers stood ready but cautious. The Space Marines held their positions, bolters aimed but not firing. Thor hovered above, lightning crackling but held in check. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Strange made his choice. He let his hands drop, his magic fading. We need to talk, really talk, not as enemies, but as people who both claim to want to protect humanity. Give me that chance before this goes any further. Guilliman studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered the Emperor's sword. You have 1 hour, sorcerer. Convince me your world deserves to remain free. Fail, and the compliance continues. The hour of talk ended with nothing resolved. Strange had shown Guilliman images through magic, memories of Earth's victories against Thanos, against Ultron, against every world-ending threat they'd faced. The Primarch watched with his arms crossed, his face showing nothing. When Strange finished, Guilliman simply shook his head. Your victories prove only that you survive by chance and individual heroism, Guilliman said, not through proper organization and unity. A house divided cannot stand forever. Eventually, your luck will run out. Strange's hands clenched into fists. Then we disagree. And I suppose we're back to fighting. Not fighting, Guilliman corrected. Compliance. There is a difference. The Primarch walked away from the ruined compound, his Ultramarines forming around him in perfect order. They left without another word, marching back to their drop pods with the discipline of soldiers who had conquered 1,000 worlds. The pods launched skyward in trails of fire, returning to the fleet that hung over Earth like a sword ready to fall. Tony stood among the wreckage of his compound, his armor reforming around him. He's not done. That was just a test. He wanted to see what we could do. And now he knows, Steve said grimly. His shield was dented in 3 places, something that shouldn't have been possible. He knows our strengths and our weaknesses. That's how generals work. They probe defenses before the real attack. Thor landed beside them, his armor scorched and torn. That being wields power I have rarely encountered. His sword, it is made to kill gods. I felt it when we fought. One clean strike from that blade and even I might fall permanently. Wanda approached, her face pale. I felt his mind when he was here. It's vast, cold, like looking into an ocean of pure logic. And he truly believes he's saving us. He's not evil. He's just absolutely certain he's right. That makes him more dangerous, Natasha observed. Evil we can fight. But someone doing terrible things because they think it's good? That's harder. Friday's voice came through Tony's suit speakers. Boss, you need to see this. The fleet is moving. Tony pulled up holographic displays showing Earth's orbit. The Imperial fleet was splitting apart, individual ships breaking formation and moving to different positions around the globe. He's setting up a blockade. Nobody gets in or out. Within hours, the blockade was complete. The Imperial Navy surrounded Earth in a loose sphere, each ship positioned to cover a section of space. Any vessel trying to leave Earth's atmosphere was turned back by warning shots that lit up the sky. The few that ignored the warnings were destroyed by lance strikes, beams of energy that could cut a ship in half. The message was clear. Earth was now a prison. But the blockade was only the beginning. Guilliman worked fast, his tactical genius planning everything down to the smallest detail. He didn't want to destroy Earth's cities or kill millions of people. That would be wasteful, inefficient, wrong. Instead, he wanted to break their will to resist. He wanted them to understand that compliance was the only logical choice. Across the globe, more drop pods fell. Not 20 this time, but hundreds. They landed in carefully chosen locations: military bases, government buildings, major cities. Each landing zone was secured by a squad of ultramarines who set up fortified positions with ruthless efficiency. They didn't attack civilians. They didn't loot or destroy unnecessarily. They simply established control, created safe zones, and waited. In Washington, D.C., a squad of ultramarines marched through the streets toward the Capitol building. Citizens fled before them, screaming, taking videos on their phones that would spread across the internet in minutes. The Space Marines ignored them. When the National Guard tried to stop them with tanks and helicopter gunships, the Ultramarines demonstrated the difference between Earth's military technology and the weapons of the Imperium. Bolters roared, and the tanks became burning wrecks. Missiles from the helicopters were shot down before they reached their targets. In 15 minutes, the capital was under Imperial control. From his flagship, Guilliman broadcast a new message. This time, it reached every device on Earth. Every television, every computer, every phone showed the same image. The Primarch standing in his armor, the Emperor's sword held point down like a knight at rest. "People of Earth," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I did not come to conquer you. I came to save you. Your world is divided into hundreds of nations, each pursuing their own interests. You face threats from space, from other dimensions, from beings with godlike power. Yet you remain fractured, arguing among yourselves while dangers gather. This cannot continue. I offer you a choice. Submit to Imperial authority, maintain your local governments under our supervision, and we will protect you. We will unite you. We will ensure humanity's survival. Or resist, and force me to use methods I would prefer to avoid. You have 72 hours to decide." The message ended, but the impact rippled across the planet. In the United Nations, emergency meetings began immediately. Some nations wanted to fight. Others, remembering how easily the Ultramarines had defeated Earth's mightiest heroes, considered surrender. The world's leaders argued while their people watched the sky in fear. In Wakanda, King T'Challa stood in the throne room, surrounded by his advisors. The Dora Milaje stood at attention, their weapons ready. T'Challa's sister Shuri worked at holographic displays, analyzing data on the Imperial forces. "Their technology is centuries beyond ours," Shuri said, frustration clear in her voice. "Maybe millennia. Their armor, their weapons, their ships. Even with vibranium, I don't know if we can match them." T'Challa's jaw was set in determination. "We have never bowed to invaders. Wakanda has remained free while empires rose and fell around us. We will not start bowing now." When Guilliman's forces approached Wakanda, they found a nation ready for war. The Ultramarines marched through the forest surrounding the hidden city, their sensors picking up defensive positions, hidden weapons, thousands of warriors preparing for battle. At the border, T'Challa waited in his Black Panther suit, his people arrayed behind him. Guilliman came himself this time, recognizing that this nation was different from the others. They were unified, purposeful, technologically advanced. They reminded him of the better worlds he had brought into compliance during the Great Crusade, worlds that resisted not from foolishness, but from pride and strength. "King T'Challa," Guilliman said, inclining his head slightly in respect. "Your nation is impressive, unified, disciplined, advanced. Under other circumstances, I would welcome Wakanda into the Imperium as an honored member, but I cannot make exceptions. If I allow you to remain independent, others will demand the same. Unity requires that all submit equally." T'Challa's voice was steady behind his mask. "My ancestors fought to keep Wakanda free. I will not dishonor them by surrendering to threats, no matter how powerful the enemy." "Then we are at an impasse," Guilliman said, "and impasses must be resolved." The battle for Wakanda was brutal. The Dora Milaje fought with skill and courage that earned the Ultramarines' respect. Vibranium spears actually penetrated power armor in ways normal weapons couldn't. Wakandan sonic weapons disrupted marine targeting systems. Shuri's drones swarmed the invaders, explosive charges damaging joints and sensors. For the first time since arriving on Earth, The Ultramarines faced an organized, well-equipped military force that made them work for every foot of ground. But respect didn't change the outcome. The Space Marines adapted to Wakandan tactics within the first hour of fighting. They called down orbital strikes on defensive positions, though Guilliman limited the bombardment to avoid excessive civilian casualties. They used their superior strength and armor to push through choke points. Slowly, methodically, they advanced toward the royal palace. T'Challa fought at the front, his vibranium suit absorbing kinetic energy with each hit, then releasing it in devastating bursts. He moved like a ghost, striking from shadows, using every trick his ancestors had perfected over centuries. He personally disabled 5 Space Marines, his claws finding the weak points in their armor. But there were always more, and they never stopped coming. Guilliman found him on the palace steps. The Primarch moved with terrifying speed for something so large, closing the distance before T'Challa could react. The Emperor's sword swept toward the king, and T'Challa brought up his arms to block. The vibranium absorbed the impact, but the force still sent him tumbling down the steps. "You fight well," Guilliman said, descending the steps with measured calm. "Your people fight well, but you are outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now with honor, or watch your city burn. I give you this choice because I respect your courage." T'Challa rose slowly, his suit's energy crackling around him. "And if we surrender? Wakanda becomes a protectorate of the Imperium. Your people remain free. Your technology remains yours. Your culture remains intact. But you answer to Imperial authority on matters of defense and foreign policy. You will contribute soldiers and resources to humanity's greater defense. In return, the Imperium protects you from all threats, now and forever." T'Challa looked back at his palace, at his people fighting and dying in the streets beyond. He thought of his father, of his ancestors, of the promise to keep Wakanda free, but he also thought of his duty to keep his people alive. Sometimes, a king had to make impossible choices. "I accept your terms," he said quietly. "But know this, Guilliman. We bow because we choose to preserve our people, not because you broke us. If you betray this trust, we will fight again, no matter the cost." Guilliman nodded slowly. "I would expect nothing less. A warrior who surrenders with honor is worth 10 who fight only for pride. Wakanda will be treated fairly under Imperial law." While Wakanda fell to strategy and overwhelming force, Strange faced his own battle. He'd returned to what remained of Kamar Taj, the ancient home of the mystic arts. The other sorcerers gathered around him, fear plain on their faces. They'd felt Guilliman's null aura, felt how it strangled their magic. Against such a being, their powers were almost useless. "We cannot fight him directly," Strange admitted. "His sword creates a dead zone where magic simply fails. But we can fight his forces. We can use the mirror dimension to strike at his troops, hit them where they can't reach us." The plan was sound in theory. Strange led a group of sorcerers in creating pocket dimensions, mirror worlds where they could observe the Ultramarines and strike without being struck back. They opened portals beneath Space Marines, dropping them into dimensional prisons. They redirected orbital lance strikes back at the ships that fired them. For a few hours, it seemed to work. Then Guilliman adapted. He recognized the pattern, saw where the portals opened most frequently, and predicted the next attack. When Strange opened a portal to drop an entire squad of Marines into the mirror dimension, he found Guilliman waiting on the other side. The Primarch stepped through the portal before Strange could close it, bringing his null aura with him. The mirror dimension began to collapse, reality reasserting itself with violent force. Strange tried to maintain the spell, pouring every ounce of his power into keeping the pocket world stable. But the Emperor's sword burned brighter, and the dimension shattered like glass. Strange found himself back in Kamar Taj, blood running from his nose and ears. Guilliman stood in the courtyard, surrounded by fallen sorcerers who had tried to stop him. The ancient texts and artifacts that lined the walls began to burn with golden fire, the sword's power purging what it saw as corruption. "Your order ends today," Guilliman said. "Unsanctioned psychers cannot be tolerated. Those who survive will be tested and bound, their powers leashed for humanity's safety. Those who refuse will be executed. These are the only options." Wong stepped forward, his hands weaving defensive spells even though he knew they wouldn't work. "We've protected this world for thousands of years. We keep out beings that would devour reality itself. Without us, Earth is defenseless against dimensional threats. Then the Imperium will take over that duty," Guilliman replied. We have methods for sealing warp rifts, for binding daemons, for protecting reality. Methods that don't require giving individuals godlike power with no oversight. Strange struggled to his feet, one hand clutching his ribs. You're wrong. You don't understand the threats we face. The beings I've fought, the powers that circle Earth like sharks. Your methods won't work here. They have worked on 10,000 worlds, Guilliman said. They will work here. Wong attacked, knowing it was futile but unable to stand by. His magic flared bright, trying to bind Guilliman in chains of pure energy. The chains shattered the moment they touched the Primarch's armor. Guilliman's backhand sent Wong flying into a wall, where he collapsed unconscious. Strange watched his friend fall and felt something break inside him. Not his spirit, but his certainty. Maybe they couldn't win this. Maybe the Primarch was simply too powerful, too smart, too unshakable in his convictions. Go ahead, Strange said tiredly. Kill me. Execute the dangerous sorcerer. That's what you came here to do, isn't it? Guilliman lowered the Emperor's sword. No. I came to protect humanity. Even from itself, if necessary. You are human. Strange. Misguided and dangerous. But human. You can still be saved. Saved. Strange laughed bitterly. Is that what you call this? Destroying everything we've built? Forcing us to submit? Yes, Guilliman said simply. Because the alternative is eventual extinction. I have seen it too many times. Humanity, standing alone, divided, falling to threats they couldn't comprehend. I will not allow it to happen again. Far above Earth, another battle raged. Tony Stark and Carol Danvers led a desperate assault on the Imperial fleet, knowing it was probably suicide but unable to stand by while their world was conquered. War Machine, Falcon, and dozens of other heroes in powered armor or spacecraft joined them, the largest coordinated space battle Earth had ever launched. They were magnificent in their futility. Tony's repulsors carved lines across the hull of an Imperial frigate, the nanotech adapting in real time to find weaknesses. Carol in her binary form punched through armor plating, her energy output matching small stars. War Machine's missiles found ammunition stores and detonated them in chain reactions that lit up the void. But the Imperial Navy had fought in space for 10,000 years. They had faced fleets of millions, Xenos, battleships the size of moons, demon engines that defied physics. A few dozen enhanced humans in power armor, no matter how determined, were not a threat. Lance batteries opened fire, beams of concentrated energy that could melt mountains. Most of the heroes dodged in time, their smaller size and agility keeping them alive. Those who were too slow simply vanished, vaporized instantly. Boarding torpedoes launched toward the hero formations, each one carrying a squad of space marines ready to fight in the void. Carol found herself the primary target. The fleet's sensors recognized her as the greatest threat, the being with enough raw power to actually damage their vessels. 3 ships focused their fire on her position, lance strikes and macro cannon shells filling the space around her with destructive energy. She dodged and weaved, her binary form blazing brighter as she pushed her powers to their limits. Then something hit her that wasn't a lance or a shell. It was a field of pure stasis, ancient technology from the dark age of humanity, something that could freeze time itself in a small bubble. Carol felt her movements slow, then stop completely. She hung in space, frozen, unable to move or think or even fall. Around her, the battle continued, but she was trapped outside of time. Tony saw her capture and swore, "Everyone pull back. This isn't working. We're just getting ourselves killed." "We can't leave her," Rhodey shouted, War Machine's weapons blazing as he tried to fight toward Carol's position. "We have to," Tony said, his voice cracking. "If we don't retreat now, we all die. Pull back to Earth. We need a new plan." The heroes retreated, leaving Carol trapped in stasis, a trophy for the Imperium. On his flagship, Guilliman watched the captured woman with interest. She possessed power levels comparable to the greatest psychers of his realm, yet it wasn't warp-based. It was something else, something to study and understand. She would be treated well, kept comfortable, but she would not be released. She was too dangerous, too powerful, too much of a threat to let run free. The remaining Avengers gathered in an emergency bunker deep beneath the ruins of their compound. Fury was there, his face grim. Strange had teleported in, badly wounded but alive. Thor stood in the corner, silent and brooding. Steve's shield lay on the table, its dents a reminder of their failures. Wanda stared at her hands, her chaos magic flickering weakly. "We're losing," Natasha said bluntly. "Wakanda fell, Kamartaj fell, Carol is captured, half of Earth's governments are ready to surrender. We're out of time and out of options." "There's always an option," Tony said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We just have to think. There has to be something we haven't tried." Wanda spoke softly, her accent thicker with stress. "There might be. My chaos magic, it's different from Doctor Strange's spells. It comes from the Mind Stone originally, but it's changed since then. It doesn't work the same way as normal magic. Maybe, if I pushed it hard enough, I could destabilize their ships. Break whatever keeps them in orbit." "That would kill you," Strange said immediately. "That much power, that much chaos, your body couldn't survive it." "Maybe it doesn't have to be just me," Wanda said. "If we combined powers, you with your magic, me with chaos magic, Vision, if we can wake him, maybe together we could generate enough energy to damage their fleet." Tony shook his head. "Even if it worked, even if we took out the fleet, Guilliman would still be here. And he's the real threat. The fleet is just his weapon. He's the mind behind it all." Thor finally spoke, his voice heavy. "Then we must face him together, all of us. Every hero left on Earth. We throw everything we have at him at once. Overwhelm him with numbers and power before he can adapt." "That's not a plan," Steve said. "That's desperation." "Perhaps," Thor admitted. "But do we have anything else?" The room fell silent. Outside, they could hear the sound of Imperial drop pods falling, another wave of Ultramarines landing to secure more territory. Earth was running out of time. They needed to decide, needed to act, needed to do something before there was nothing left to save. They gathered every hero who could still fight, every person with powers, every soldier with advanced weapons, every being who called Earth home and refused to surrender. The meeting point was chosen carefully, an empty field in upstate New York, far from cities, where the battle wouldn't kill innocents. Strange opened portals across the globe, and through them came Earth's last defenders. Tony arrived in his best armor, every weapon system loaded and ready. Steve stood beside him, shield strapped to his arm despite the dents. Thor brought what remained of New Asgard's warriors, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. The Wakandan forces came through their own portal, T'Challa leading them despite his agreement with Guilliman, because some oaths ran deeper than surrender. Wanda hovered above the ground, red energy crackling around her hands. Vision stood at her side, the Mind Stone pulsing with power. Bruce Banner waited in human form, knowing the Hulk would emerge when the fighting started. Dozens more filled the field. Heroes, warriors, soldiers, all ready to die for their world's freedom. Strange stood at the center of them all, his hands weaving a spell that would broadcast their challenge directly to Guilliman. When the portal opened, carrying his voice to the Primarch aboard his flagship, Strange spoke with quiet determination. "Roboute Guilliman, Lord Regent of the Imperium, we reject your compliance. We reject your rule. If you want Earth, you'll have to take it from us. We're done running. We're done hiding. Come down here and face us, all of us, and we'll show you what humanity can do when we stand together." The response came within minutes. A single drop pod screamed down from orbit, landing in the center of the field with enough force to shake the ground. The pod opened, and Guilliman stepped out, alone. He wore his full armor, the armor of fate gleaming in the sunlight. The Emperor's sword burned in his hand, golden flames dancing along its edge. He looked at the assembled heroes, his face showing no emotion, just cold calculation. "You have chosen defiance," Guilliman said, his voice carrying across the field. "So be it. I gave you every chance to submit peacefully. What happens now is on your heads." He raised his free hand, and the sky darkened. More pods began to fall, hundreds of them, each one carrying Space Marines. But Guilliman didn't wait for his troops to land. He charged forward, covering 50 yards in seconds, the Emperor's sword raised high. Thor met him first, Stormbreaker crackling with lightning. The two titans clashed with a sound like thunder, their weapons throwing off sparks of gold and blue. Around them, the battle exploded into chaos. The Space Marines landed and immediately engaged, their bolters roaring as they fired into the mass of heroes. Energy blasts, arrows, repulsor beams, and magic spells filled the air in a storm of violence. The Hulk crashed into a squad of Ultramarines like a green meteor, his fists already swinging. He grabbed one Marine and threw him at another, then ripped the bolter from a third's hands and beat him with it. 4 Marines concentrated their fire on him, explosive rounds tearing into his flesh, but pain only made him angrier. He roared, a sound of pure rage, and grew larger, stronger, more dangerous. Tony coordinated the tech-based heroes through his comm system, directing fire at weak points in the Marine formations. War Machine laid down suppressing fire while Falcon used his mobility to strike from above. Spider-Man webbed up Marines' weapons and helmets, blinding them, making them vulnerable. The Wakandan warriors used their vibranium spears to punch through power armor, fighting with a skill that made even the Ultramarines work for their victories. Wanda and Vision fought as one, their powers complementing each other perfectly. Wanda's chaos magic tore through Space Marine formations, crushing armor and hurling bodies through the air. Vision's density manipulation made him nearly invulnerable, and the Mind Stone's beam carved through ceramite like butter. Together they held an entire flank against waves of Ultramarines. But Guilliman was the center of everything. He fought Thor with one hand and fended off attacks from a dozen other heroes with the other. His tactical genius read the battle in real time, predicting attacks before they happened, finding weaknesses in every defense. When Steve tried to flank him, Guilliman's kick sent the super soldier flying. When Natasha attempted to use her widow's bites, the Primarch's backhand knocked her unconscious before she could fire. The Emperor's sword carved through anything it touched. Thor's armor bore new scars, burning cuts that refused to heal properly. The weapon hummed with power, hungry for godly blood. Guilliman pressed his advantage, his centuries of combat experience showing in every move. He wasn't faster than Thor, wasn't stronger, but he was smarter. He fought like a chess master, always 3 moves ahead. Strange coordinated the magical assault, opening portals to redirect enemy fire, creating shields to protect wounded heroes, attempting to bind Guilliman with dimensional chains. But the Primarch's null aura weakened every spell, and the Emperor's sword shattered magical constructs with contemptuous ease. When Strange tried to trap Guilliman in the mirror dimension again, the Primarch simply destroyed the portal before Strange could finish the spell. The battlefield became a nightmare of fire and blood. Space Marines fell, their armor breached by lucky shots or overwhelming force. Heroes fell too, carried away through portals by Strange when they could no longer fight. The Hulk took a power fist to the chest that cracked ribs even his healing couldn't instantly repair. Tony's armor lost an arm to a chainsword, the nanotech struggling to rebuild fast enough. Black Panther fought with desperate courage but was eventually overwhelmed by 3 Marines working in perfect coordination. Guilliman saw it all, processed it all, adjusted his strategy with every passing second. His troops were taking casualties, more than he'd expected, but they were winning. Earth's heroes fought well, better than most forces he'd faced, but they lacked the discipline and unity to truly threaten a Primarch and his Space Marines. This battle would end in compliance, one way or another. Then Wanda screamed. The sound cut through the chaos of battle, a cry of pure power and desperation. Red energy exploded from her body, a wave of chaos magic that washed across the battlefield. Space Marines froze in place as reality itself bent around them. Weapons misfired, armor seized up. Even Guilliman staggered, feeling the warp energies pressing against his null aura. Wanda rose higher into the air, her eyes glowing pure red, her body surrounded by swirling scarlet power. She had pushed beyond her limits, pulled power from sources she didn't fully understand, and now that power was tearing her apart from the inside, but she didn't care. If this was what it took to save her world, she would burn herself out completely. Vision flew up beside her, his hand taking hers. The Mind Stone in his forehead blazed with golden light, adding its power to hers. Together, they became a beacon of combined energy, chaos, magic, and Infinity Stone power, merging into something new, something terrifying. Now, Wanda shouted, her voice distorted by the power flowing through her. Strange understood immediately. He gathered every remaining sorcerer, every person who could channel magical energy, and directed them to feed their power to Wanda and Vision. Portals opened across the battlefield, streams of magical energy flowing toward the 2 hovering figures. The light grew brighter, more intense, until it hurt to look at directly. Guilliman saw what they were attempting, and his tactical mind immediately calculated the danger. If they released that much power in a focused blast, they might actually hurt him, might damage his armor enough to make him vulnerable. More importantly, they might kill dozens of his Space Marines, losses he could not easily replace. He had to stop them now. The Primarch launched himself into the air, his armor's jump pack roaring to life. He flew toward Wanda and Vision, the Emperor's sword raised high, ready to cut them both down before they could complete whatever attack they planned. His null aura pushed against the swirling energies, creating a pocket of dead space where magic failed. Thor saw him coming and threw Stormbreaker with all his strength. The enchanted axe flew true, crackling with lightning, aimed at Guilliman's back. The Primarch twisted in midair, impossibly agile for something so large, and caught the axe by its handle. For a moment, he held Stormbreaker, felt its power trying to reject him, trying to return to Thor. Then he threw it back, harder than Thor had thrown it, fast enough to break the sound barrier. Thor barely dodged his own weapon, the axe grazing his shoulder and drawing blood. By the time he caught Stormbreaker and looked up again, Guilliman had reached Wanda and Vision. The Emperor's sword swept toward them, golden flames bright enough to rival the sun. The blade struck the sphere of combined energy surrounding them and stopped. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Guilliman's weapon failed to cut through something. The chaos magic and Mind Stone power created a barrier that even the Emperor's sword couldn't immediately pierce. Guilliman pressed harder, putting his full strength behind the blade, and the barrier began to crack. Inside the sphere, Wanda felt the pressure, felt the sword trying to break through. Blood ran from her nose, her ears, her eyes. The power flowing through her was too much, burning her from the inside out. She looked at Vision, saw the cracks forming in his synthetic skin where the energy threatened to tear him apart. "We can't hold this much longer," Vision said, his voice distorted. "If we release it now, the blast will kill everything within a mile, our own people included." "Then we aim it up," Wanda gasped. "Hit the fleet, damage them enough that they have to retreat." "That will kill us," Vision said quietly. "The feedback from that much power going in one direction will tear us apart." Wanda smiled through the blood on her face. "I know." But before they could release the gathered energy, before Guilliman's sword could break through their barrier, something changed. The Primarch suddenly stopped pushing. He hung in the air, his sword still pressed against the energy sphere, but his face had changed. The cold calculation was gone, replaced by something that might have been understanding. Guilliman looked down at the battlefield below. His space marines fighting with perfect discipline, never breaking formation, never retreating. Earth's heroes fighting with desperate courage, throwing themselves at enemies they knew they couldn't beat, dying to protect people they'd never met. He saw the Hulk, bleeding from a dozen wounds, still fighting. He saw a Spider-Man, his suit torn and burned, using his webs to pull a wounded civilian to safety. He saw Steve Rogers, barely able to stand, raising his dented shield one more time. They weren't fighting for power or conquest or empire. They were fighting for the simple right to choose their own path. They would rather die than submit, rather burn than bow. And they did it not because some distant emperor demanded it, but because they chose to, because they believed their freedom was worth any price. For the first time in 300 years, Roboute Guilliman felt doubt. Not about his mission or his purpose or his loyalty to the emperor, but doubt about whether his way was the only way. He had spent millennia bringing worlds into compliance, always certain he was right, always convinced that unity through strength was humanity's only hope. But these people had survived without the Imperium. They had faced threats that would have destroyed lesser worlds, and they had won through cooperation and sacrifice and sheer stubborn determination. The Emperor's sword lowered slowly. Guilliman descended to the ground, his boots touching earth that was torn and burned from battle. Around him, the fighting slowed, then stopped. Space Marines held their fire, uncertain. Heroes watched cautiously, weapons ready, but not attacking. Guilliman looked at Strange, who stood among his wounded friends, blood and dirt covering his once pristine robes. "You would have done it," the Primarch said. "That woman, and the synthetic man, they would have died to stop me." "Yes," Strange said simply. "We all would have. That's what you don't understand about us. We're not just willing to die for freedom, we insist on it." "I understand more than you think," Guilliman replied. He turned in a slow circle, taking in the devastation, the bodies of Marines and heroes alike. "I have brought compliance to 1,000 worlds. I have seen resistance broken, rebellions crushed, defiance turned to obedience. And I have always been certain it was necessary, that unity through force was the only way to save humanity from itself." He looked back at Strange, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not weakness, but recognition. But I have never seen a world like this. Never seen people fight so hard, not for conquest or power, but simply for the right to remain themselves. And I wonder if perhaps my father's vision, for all its wisdom, is not the only path forward. The battlefield fell completely silent. Every eye was on Guilliman, waiting to see what the Primarch would do next. The Emperor's sword still burned in his hand, but its flame seemed dimmer now, less certain. "I came to save you," Guilliman continued, "to protect humanity from the darkness that I know waits in the void. But I see now that in trying to save you, I would destroy what makes you worth saving. Your chaos, your freedom, your stubborn insistence on choosing your own path, even when that path leads to danger. These things are not weaknesses, they are your greatest strengths." He raised his free hand, and across the battlefield, Space Marines began withdrawing. They moved in perfect order, boarding drop pods that would carry them back to orbit. Guilliman looked at his own hand, at the Emperor's sword, and for a long moment seemed to be having an internal debate. "I will declare Earth exempt from compliance," he said finally. "By my authority as Lord Regent, I will report to the Imperium that the warp rift led nowhere, that no world was found. Earth will remain free, unknown to the Imperium, able to forge its own destiny." "Why?" Tony asked, his suit's damaged arm hanging uselessly. "You were winning. You could have forced us to surrender. Why stop now?" Guilliman was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more human. "Because I have spent 300 years fighting for humanity's survival. But survival is not the same as living. You have shown me that humanity can thrive without the Emperor's doctrine, can find strength in diversity rather than unity. If that is true, if there is another way, then perhaps my father's Imperium is not humanity's only hope. Perhaps it is simply one path among many." He looked directly at Strange. "But know this, Sorcerer. The Imperium is vast beyond your comprehension. If they find Earth through other means, they will come in numbers I cannot stop. They will bring exterminatus, the complete destruction of your world. When that day comes, and it may, you must be ready. Not just to fight, but to prove that your way works as well as mine." Strange nodded slowly. "We'll be ready. And if that day comes, maybe by then you'll have changed things from the inside. Maybe you'll be the one arguing for our freedom instead of our compliance." A ghost of a smile crossed Guilliman's face. "Perhaps. The Imperium is rigid, but not unchangeable. If a Primarch begins to question, others may follow. Change is slow, but it is not impossible." The last of the Space Marines boarded their drop pods and launched skyward. Guilliman turned to follow them, then paused. He looked back at the assembled heroes one last time. "Guard your world well," he said. "You have earned the right to choose your own fate. Do not waste that gift." Then he was gone, his own drop pod screaming into the sky, leaving behind a battlefield full of exhausted, wounded, but victorious heroes. Above them, the Imperial fleet began to move, ships firing their engines and pulling away from Earth. Within hours, they would disappear into the warp rift, and the rift itself would close behind them. Strange lowered himself to the ground, his legs finally giving out. Around him, other heroes collapsed, the adrenaline that had kept them fighting finally fading. Medics rushed onto the field through portals, beginning the long work of treating the wounded and recovering the dead. Tony's suit opened, and he stepped out, his face pale but determined. Did that really just happen? Did we actually convince a demigod that freedom matters more than order? "Not convinced," Steve said, sitting down heavily beside his shield. "Changed his mind. There's a difference. He still believes in his mission. He just realized there might be another way to achieve it." Thor stood looking at the sky where the Imperial fleet had been. That being was ancient and powerful, forged in wars we cannot imagine. Yet he possessed something rare among the mighty, the ability to admit he might be wrong. There is honor in that. Wanda floated down slowly, Vision supporting her. Both looked like they were about to collapse, their bodies barely holding together after channeling so much power. But they were alive, and they were smiling. "We did it," Wanda said softly. "We actually did it. We saved the world by making someone see us as we really are." Strange pulled himself to his feet, using a staff for support. "Not just save the world, we changed the mind of someone who might, in time, change an entire Imperium. That's not a small thing." Far above Earth, aboard the Macraga's Honor, Guilliman stood alone in his chambers. The Emperor's sword rested on its stand, the golden flames dimmed to nothing. He looked at his reflection in the polished armor he'd removed, seeing not just a Primarch, but a being who had just done something he'd never thought possible. Admitted he might be wrong. He would file his report with the Imperium, would tell them the warp rift led to empty space. He would lie to protect a world that had shown him a truth he'd forgotten. That humanity's greatest strength was not in unity enforced from above, but in the choice to stand together despite their differences. The stars continued their eternal dance, unchanged by the brief conflict that had raged around one small blue world. But something had changed. Something important. A seed of doubt had been planted in a mind that had never doubted before, and seeds, given time, could grow into mighty trees. On Earth, the heroes rebuilt. The damage was extensive, the loss is real, but they had won something more precious than victory. They had won the right to remain themselves, flawed and chaotic and beautifully free. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a Primarch carried their story back to an Imperium that had forgotten such stories were possible. The question of whether Roboute Guilliman's superhuman tactical genius would prove superior to gods and monsters, and the concept of human freedom had been answered. Not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. Sometimes, the greatest battles were won not by force of arms, but by the courage to question everything you thought you knew.